Good afternoon. Uh, Today we are back for the fourth lecture of this session on basics of neutron scattering. Today there was a massive power outage in Mumbai region, so we have just come up on internet few minutes back. Hope everything will be all right throughout the lecture. So we were discussing, if you remember in the last meeting, about diffraction of neutrons. On that discussion, actually, I ended the last lecture stating that working in the Fourier space, and we need to get our data on the space. As an example, if I could do a photography, I showed you, this is a FCC crystal. To see this, actually you have to go through a route where we get intensity as a function of Q. And from this we need to rebuild a structure N of R through Fourier inversion. Now, I specifically show this data because this data is very interesting. You can see that the peak intensities are increasing with respect to x-axis. Generally, you are not used to see an intensity data in Bragg scattering like this. It's other way around. I showed you this because this data is the time of flight data from accelerated base source, and time of flight goes with respect to lambda. You may be aware that I wrote earlier that the wave vector transfer Q equal to 4 pi by lambda sine theta in a scattering experiment, and that shows. So here the axis goes versus, as we know as, time of flight. So they use a polychromatic beam where you have a range of lambdas and the data is collected as time of flight. I'll discuss this later in greater details. But interestingly, as the time of flight becomes larger and larger, that means the neutrons are slower and slower. So in lambda, you are going in the other direction. It is going, the lambda is shorter in this direction and longer here. And since Q is equal to pi by lambda sine theta, as I go to larger and larger lambda, my Q becomes smaller and smaller. So time of flight data, I'm sorry, the time of flight data maps the lambda. Larger the time of flight, larger is the lambda, smaller is the Q. So this is the small q region, this is the small q region, and this side is the large q region. So this is just reverse of what you will see in an ordinary X-ray diffraction data or a reactor-based neutron source. So this is the difference between a time of flight data versus data from a reactor. This is just an example I used, but anyway, this data is in Q space, and we need to go back to real space to get a structure in real space. So as I last time, I showed you that the scattering factor, scattering amplitude, S for a crystalline solid, for an HKL reflection is given by, there is some disruption, sorry. So what I showed you last time, when we try to evaluate the structure factor, the structure factor for X-rays or for neutrons, they're almost same except for this term, which is the form factor which falls X-ray as a function of Q, whereas in case of neutrons is the scattering length which remains same versus Q. That's why in case of X-rays you don't see the large angle peaks or the large Q peaks, but in neutrons you can see. But you ran at this, I will need this. I will need this. Don't take it here. So with this, now let's consider a finite temperature. This evaluate these expressions are true for an experiment at 0 degree Kelvin. There is no motion. But now let me bring in the motion in crystal diffraction. So at finite temperature, we have one more factor which is known as Debye-Waller factor. So this is because the atoms and molecules are in thermal motion around their positions, and this thermal motion affects the intensity of the Bragg peak, and how it affects that I will come to shortly. Actually, I will go back a little bit into the history, tell you a little bit of story. You are all of us aware that in hello. So I'll tell you a little bit of historical story. We know that 1895, Röntgen discovered X-rays, and actually this is that famous photograph actually of where Röntgen photographed his wife's hand with the wedding ring you can see here. So this is the you can say radiography, X-ray radiography, and this is most common for all of us because this is heavily used in medical science as a diagnostic tool, X-ray radiography. But shortly afterwards, around 2013, 2012, X-ray diffraction was discovered by Laue. So when Laue proposed X-ray diffraction, because of two things, the wavelength of X-rays are commensurate with the interatomic distance in a crystal. That was the main reason. So when he proposed that, his boss, Sommerfeld, had some apprehension that there is thermal motion for atoms and molecules in a solid. So if you look at a solid at any instant, then it will look somewhat like this, according to Sommerfeld or others, that there is no periodicity. And then how will you see a crystal diffraction? This was the fear. But as popular this picture is, I will show you the other photograph. This is the first Laue pattern by Friedrich and Knipping. This was very poor photograph, but you can see the spots which confirm that there is diffraction, and this is quickly improved upon, and this is the Loy pattern of zinc plane. So with these two things, we can go ahead, and now I can tell you what happens when the temperature is not 0 degree Kelvin, but let's say room temperature or some higher temperature. What happens then? So this was a solution which came from Peter Debye. He says, and actually speaking, it was discussed heavily at a famous cafe called Cafe Lutz, which was there in Munich at that time. Munich was the center of X-ray diffraction. I'm telling you the story about X-ray diffraction because neutron diffraction follows very closely. So, for example, the temperature will remain the same. So, what Peter Debye says that I came to the conclusion that the sharpness of interference line would not suffer, but the intensity should diminish with increasing angle of scattering, the more so the higher the temperature. And he gave an expression which says that at a temperature, if U square is the deviation from the mean, then the intensity will go down by I0 equal to e to the power minus 1/3 U square Q square. This is known as Debye-Waller factor. And how it is evaluated is so. So the fear that as you go higher in temperature or come to a finite temperature, the periodicity of the lattice will be lost is not right. Actually, the periodicity is not lost, but the atoms vibrate around their mean position, and what happens actually, as you go to higher and higher temperature, the amplitude of this vibration goes up. So now that means the periodicity of the crystal lattice is not lost, but what you have is something like a dynamic form factor which you discussed earlier. I was telling you, if a charge distribution is large, it falls in Q space. Larger the charge cloud, faster is the fall. And Peter Debye, this comment is exactly same with what I talked about with respect to form factor, that the sharpness of the interference lines would not suffer, but their intensity should diminish with increasing angle of scattering. Read it Q. The more so, the higher the temperature, because the higher the temperature, larger is the size of this vibration. So you can consider that a lattice which is smaller, as if its average size has increased as you go to higher and higher temperature. And that gives this form factor. I'll just, so it was here, lower temperature. This is what it was at lower temperature. As you go to higher temperature, the amplitude of oscillation has increased, and so has increased at this U square. So I will try to quickly show you in a very simple derivation how it comes. So if Rj is the position of the lattice point at 0 Kelvin, then at any finite temperature, at any time, at any time, this Rj, not temperature, sorry, it's time. At any time, there is a displacement around the mean. And you can write the position at any time t is Rj plus U. So I'm sorry that there was some disturbance, and now I cannot use the blackboard that I was using to write. So I will later I will try to do it once again for you, but I will try to go slow on the transparency and hope that you will to go and understand what I'm trying to say. I'll be slow. So we were discussing about Debye-Waller factor. Debye-Waller factor is coming from dynamics. Dynamics, the atoms or molecules around their mean positions in a crystal lattice, and this is what e power minus W gives me the structure factor for neutron. It can be also equally, because I have written here BL average, this should be FL in case of X-rays, otherwise rest of it goes the same, and this Q will be equal to a reciprocal lattice vector G when you talk about crystal diffraction. As I told you earlier that there are apprehensions that will destroy the periodicity of a crystal lattice, but it is not so. Even with this opposition, the experiments were done, and this is another revolutionary picture. The matter research community, because Einstein made the comments looking at this picture. This is for the first time human being is able to look at human being inside matter at a microscopic length scale. So this is a Laue pattern. But how it happens? So I was trying to explain to you that when you heat a sample, when a sample comes to a finite temperature, the lattice positions, the lattice is not destroyed, as Debye said. But what happens is, that the atoms and molecules, because of thermal motion, they spread out more around their mean position. If I can say spread out. So as they become, so as if you have got a larger scatterer compared to a smaller scatterer. This is true for neutrons also, because when I say lattice position, the nucleus with the associated electrons will be oscillating around this mean position, and it will be receiving a larger and larger in real space. And this is something like a form factor. So if this has if the on the left hand side, if you see the picture, if there was a form factor associated with this one, for this distribution, the form factors will be falling faster, and that's what Debye said. And we can try to sort of look at it and work it out. So when in position at a time t, at a time atom or molecule, then RJT has got two parts. One is the 0° Kelvin lattice position, fixed position, and the displacement around that. And this term comes from dynamics. So right now I am not talking about dynamics directly, but through an average picture as you see here. So I need to evaluate e to the power minus I g dot RJT for lattice, which is nothing but e to the power minus I g dot J and e to the power minus g dot U, which is a function of time. And this time average is nothing but thermal average, because temperature is temperature which gives this oscillation. Now, the simple trick I will do, all of you can do this. I need to do a thermal averaging of e to the power minus 2 of e to the power minus u. G dot Rj does not have any thermal average. It does not have any thermal average. U, which needs to be taken to thermal average. So, do this. What I get is can expand this exponential terms 1 minus x plus 1 by factorial 2x squared, and so on, the exponential terms. Now this term becomes linear in U, and we know that when an atom is oscillating around its mean position, it's oscillating as much to the left, as much to the right, as much to the top as to the bottom, because it's the mean position does not, so it's symmetric. And for a symmetric vibration, G dot U, average of that should be 0. So G dot U square term, the second term, and this is G square, and G dot U is GU cos theta. Now we can do an averaging on U square, which is the amplitude, and also on the angle. Now we know on a sphere, if you average out cos theta, it should be cos square theta, sin theta, d theta, d phi, integrated 0 to 2 pi on phi, minus pi to pi on theta, and 0 to u. And so that will give me 1/3. Square remains, and I need an average u square. So that means 1 minus half g dot u square becomes 1 minus 6 g square u square. Under the assumption that if this term is small, 1 minus x, I can club it back as e to the power minus 1/6 g square e square e to the power minus x. That's all I've done. And when I talk about this term comes from amplitude. So when I do intensity, I need to do a square, and that's how I get this term I0 e to the power minus 1/3 g square and average value of u square, this amplitude. So this u square average, the thermal average, it goes up with temperature. You can see as you go to higher and higher Q, you have higher and higher value of G, then also it goes down. That's exactly what that I came to the conclusion that the sharpness of the interference lines would not suffer, but that their intensity should diminish, increasing angle of a scattering, the more so the higher the temperature. So temperature and Q, this goes down. So temperature, and I always use this example. I myself did this experiment. Actually, one of my colleagues did this experiment. He is also possibly attending this lecture. It was silicon powder. This experimental data explains many things. Silicon data, we heated it up to 50 centigrade, and we took the data once again. This is the room temperature data. This is the high temperature data. Now, when you heat a sample, several things happen. That the sample expands. As the sample expands, 2 sin theta equal to n lambda or lambda. So as d becomes larger, smaller. So the lattice is seen here. Shifting of this peak or theta value. That is one. Secondly, this is what I was describing just now. This is the Debye-Waller effect. So the sharpness did not change, but the intensity changed. So the intensity became less. And of course, this is where another important factor whenever we're designing a scattering experiment is in this X-ray here, for this with X-rays, the Q resolution allows me to see the difference between alpha and beta lines of copper, K alpha, K beta lines. This slight shoulder, these are K alpha, K beta lines. So this picture shows me that when I heat a sample, it expands, and the Bragg intensity goes down. That you can resolve this piece. Now the fact is that from this change, this is e to the power minus q square, u square, g square, this change. So if I know this g, which is very simple, I can find out what is the average displacement around the mean. and that is known as thermal sphere. But in general, if you really want to do a proper fitting, then often this is not a spherical distribution around the mean. It is more of an ellipsoid because the bonding of neighbors vary from one direction to another. And depending on that bonding and the strength of bond, this average displacement is not possible directions which I showed you in my calculation, but it is anisotropic, and the more apt term will be thermal ellipsoid, and we can map this thermal ellipsoid using the Bragg diffraction. The reaches of crystal diffraction is huge. Like all of us, or many of you, you go for phase determination, and typically, I mean, I took it from one of my papers, and it's in a nickel ion film. You try to find out where are the nickel peaks, where are the aluminum peaks, and whether the alloy has started forming. And we find that when you anneal at 300 degrees, some alloy peaks started coming, and this is very commonplace for all of us. An example, apart from thermal parameters, particle size. We know that the peak width, if it is an crystal, it should be a delta function, of course convoluted with the resolution of the instrument. But often, especially when some phase is growing, you find some, like in this case, we could see that Ni3 aluminum phase was growing in a nickel aluminum layer, and that Ni3Al phase, the size, average size of those things, one can evaluate from the width of this peak if we can take out the instrumental resolution. And particle size is given as k lambda, the beta cos theta, where k is a anisotropy parameter, usually close to 1. Lambda is the wavelength. Beta is the full width at half maxima for such peaks when you fit a Gaussian Lorentzian composite, and this gives the particle size. So this is a very common thing to find out particle sizes. But so far I have been talking about research using neutrons, and most of you are doing, but actually neutron has a huge strength because neutrons can penetrate very, very deep. Neutron can penetrate as deep as 10 centimeters, and this is extremely unlike X-rays or any other radiation. Neutrons can go around 30, electrons can 30 to 50 angstrom thickness. X-rays, they can go up to 10 micron thickness. Neutrons go tens of centimeters. So that's why a very big industrial use of neutrons is, one is radiography. I showed you the image of Röntgen's wife's hand, that is radiography. So one can do neutron radiography, that means similar imaging. You have got a variable absorbing material in front of neutron and picture. And here, this is the neutron radiography. But this is just for showing you the strength of neutron. In this talk, because we are mostly looking at neutron scattering techniques, I will not be covering the neutron imaging techniques, which is neutron radiography. But another important thing is about strain measurement. Just now I said that with temperature, the lattice position shifts. Same thing is true when you have strain in a medium. Either it can be expanded or be contracted. So here in this radiography, portions where the strain, the densities are more, you can do neutron diffraction. And this neutron diffraction on this huge, here, these things of industrial size, not small. It, even sometimes the job may be as large as, and you can do selective radiography, not selective diffraction, on small parts of this material and find out the strain after welding, before welding, or after some mechanical processing in the system. Like in this case, these are turbine blades for some offshore wind power units, which is a EN 1022509S355 steel, which is widely used in fabrication of offshore wind turbine monopiles. And after this was done on an instrument called Engine at Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, and this gives you the strain map. This gives you the strain map of the sample. So this is one part which I wanted to tell you, that neutrons have the strength of going deep in material. The second module of these lectures is talks about magnetic neutron diffraction. So I have been discussing with you about nucleus interaction, which is actually extremely short range. So because the nucleus is femtometer size and the wavelength is around few angstrom or in the range of angstrom, I say that the nucleus can be assumed a delta function potential, and I wrote down a Fermi delta function for you. We must remember that neutrons have another interaction, which I have been avoiding so far to tell you. This will be taken up in more details, but let me just tell you that neutron has a magnetic moment of 1.91 nuclear magneton and the spin half particle. This is a tiny magnet. And all these magnetic materials, they have unfilled shells, which gives the magnetic properties of it, because these unfilled electron orbitals gives magnetic moment to the lattice sites. So these unfilled shells, they can interact with this neutron. But in this case, again, like X-rays, there is a form factor. I have just tried to show schematically a shell in which the atomic resides. Now this atomic spin will interact with the neutron spin. And when it interacts with the neutron spin, it will scatter, and it will also have a magnetic form factor. So apart from nuclear form factor is not there. So apart from nuclear scattering, we also have magnetic scattering, magnetic diffraction, and which will be weighted by a magnetic form factor. I will just briefly mention it before I go forward. So magnetic form factor again is a Fourier transform. We are in Fourier space, and we are in Fourier transform of the magnetic charge distribution. So this is the shell on which magnetic factor has to be integrated, and that because it's a shell, this falls much faster than what we saw in case of an atom. So the magnetic peaks, the pure magnetic peaks, will appear at much smaller Q. Other peaks. Now, also it is important. I am just mentioning it here. I am not deriving it here because today I am not able to use my blackboard. That the perpendicular component of Q, that means the magnetic vector, normal to the Q vector, the momentum transfer vector gives us the magnetic scattering. And with unpolarized neutrons, you do magnetic neutron diffraction, and so you can have pure nuclear. As I told you, we find out sum over e to the power minus I q dot RJ, square of that gives you the intensity. In case of magnetic moment in our sample, this is the nuclear part. We also have a square, the magnetic part, but weighted by a vector q, which is basically given here. So I can write out this thing, this part this is same as X-rays and neutrons, except this BJ and BJ part, and multiplied by the Debye-Waller factor. Fm square is very, very similar, and this is also separately weighted by a Debye-Waller factor, which is different from what you have for the nuclear term. And this is the expression. So like just a very small example, if you have magnetic scattering which is 0.10% of the nuclear scattering, then overall intensity will be, you can write down Fn square plus 0.1 Fn square, which will be around 1.21 times. So basically, if the magnetic structure and nuclear structure, they are commensurate. Let me emphasize this. I wish I could use the black book. See, you have a magnetic structure which is ferromagnetic lattice. The ferromagnetic lattice, the periodicity of the magnetic structure is exactly same as periodicity of the lattice structure. And in that case, if I am below the Curie temperature of that magnetic material, then I will get the Bragg peak due to nuclear scattering, but it will be an increased Bragg peak because I also have the contribution from the magnetic form factor, from the magnetic structure, which is sitting right on top of the nuclear Bragg peak. So it aids the intensity, adds to the intensity. If I do polarized neutron scattering, in that case, one will be plus, one will be minus. The magnetic moment can be plus with respect to the nuclear scattering, it can be minus. And this gives me, when I do polarized neutron scattering, that means neutron coming with up spin and the sample is polarized in the same direction. How to do all these things I will tell you later when I explain to the experimental part. But I can make a neutron beam of spin plus minus of polarized. That means I have plus of coming or minus of coming. How? I tell you later. When you do that, then when it is plus up, it is adding to the nuclear intensity. When it is minus, then it is subtracting from the nuclear intensity, and you will see a variation in intensity with respect to polarization of the neutrons, and you can fit the structure. And this is one of the spectrometers in Dhruva. Here, I showed you earlier, this is the reactor wall. Here, in an array, neutron detectors are there. These are position sensitive detectors. That means at a time, you can collect the diffraction data over a very large range of angles. It saves time, and you can do many experiments which you others couldn't do. So, and the data typically looks like this. So you can see this is powder scattering data from a powder sample from Dhruva neutron source. So now this is a neutron data. Many of you are familiar with X-ray data, and this is neutron data which has gone through Rydberg refinement. Now, some of you may be familiar with Rydberg refinement, some of you are not. I tell you that Rydberg refinement is a technique. Often we don't do a direct Fourier inversion of this data. You can see this data is plotted intensity versus Q. Also, direct Fourier inversion will give me model independent data, but usually that doesn't happen because for that I need to have intensity over the entire Q range. That doesn't happen. So what one does, there are various programs available, but the best primary technique is that I have the experimental data and I start with model of my crystal, ordered crystal. I start with some site moment for the magnetic sites, and then generate a Fourier inversion of that, generate this experimental data and compare them. After that, it is like any other data fitting technique, a chi-square minimization. And this chi-square minimization goes on, and you can see this is the final result. So one thing, in all this process, I have refined a model. So my result is certainly model dependent. So then all of you might question that what is the uniqueness of this result. I will say the uniqueness of the result depends on how good a model you have chosen. But often this is extremely good, and you can see the fit, and then what we get is this. So this is the structure. You can see this gives the crystallographic structure, but it also neutrons gives me, this is unpolarized neutron data. It gives me the site moments. Now, neutron is possibly the only tool which can give you microscopic site moments of a magnetic system. So any magnetic order that can be pinned using magnetic neutron diffraction, and possibly many of you who are beginning your research will be working in magnetic materials, and I know that there are many macroscopic techniques like SQUID, vibration sample magnetometer, and others, but neutron is a unique tool to actually give you the magnetic structure. Of course, there are other techniques like XMCD, which can give you element-specific magnetism. That also has its own advantage. I don't mean to say neutron is the best technique. That will be like a one-eyed deer, you know. Everything is not best about neutrons, but in many things, neutron has an advantage. And this series of lectures will try to tell you that where you can use neutrons cleverly to solve your problem. One, of course, big disadvantage of neutron is the intensity. All throughout my talk, I didn't tell you that a neutron reactor, it gives you, like Dhruva, it is a reactor which has got a flux of 1.8 10 to the power 14 neutrons per centimeter square per second. Whereas any laboratory X-ray source can give you 100 times more, 200 times more power. If I go to a synchrotron, brightness, so they actually photons per centimeter square per second per steradian, because it is extremely focused, and that can go as high as 10 to the power 20, 10 to the power 22. So with extremely small sample, or if you want to do an experiment very, very quickly, you need to go to synchrotron, and neutrons may not be possible. So that's why neutron has its own advantage. Neutron also has its disadvantages, and you need to tread carefully when you choose to do an experiment using neutrons, using X-rays, and using other techniques. So anyway, I showed you today that ultimately with neutron data and with Rydberg analysis, you can reach the crystal structure as well as the magnetic structure, and a very large group of people here, they're doing it. And the next module of talks, which is purely on diffraction only, will attempt this. Teach you about how to do magnetic neutron diffraction. Now, I will go ahead. I don't think I will have enough time today to deal with this part of my talk, but I'll just quickly introduce you to what I plan to discuss in the next meeting. Hopefully, I will have the blackboard available to me, so I can do it a little more comfortably, and you will also be to form the derivations. See, there's a master formula. If you remember, this is what I showed you, that basically, if you remember, we did Fermi golden rule and Born approximation, all basically an initial state k lambda goes to a final state k prime lambda prime under the effect of a potential. I do V with the operator. So as if the V is an operator, this is typically quantum mechanical expression for effect on a neutron of k lambda, that means initial wave vector k, and lambda is all other things, to final wave vector k prime, lambda prime, and I am going away from simple scattering where energy is not transferred. So magnitude of k prime is not same as magnitude of k. There has been an energy transfer between the neutron and the medium. So when I do that, then I need to conserve energy. I must say that the neutron system energy before scattering should be equal to neutron plus system after scattering. And I write a conservation. How to implement it, I'll just hint you. So basically, this I will try to do it in the next lecture. I introduce this conservation to a delta function formula. Don't be scared, it looks big, but I will show you step by step what is done. And ultimately, what I'll tell you, what I'm trying to show you, that we map a system in Q and omega space. That means in momentum and energy space. And from there, we attempt to get information in the real space and time. That is what we actually are aiming at. How the system, if it is only real space, then how arrangements in real space. If you say real space and time, then how arrangements and how they are moving in space and time. That's what I'll be attempting in my next lecture. So today I stop here, and I don't know. Can I take questions or comments from here? I'll move. So I will. I like to take any questions from you. Please, you can ask any questions, because these parts actually, some of you may be familiar, some of you not so familiar. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Stop our session now, and I'll again actually I'll upload the assignments. This is specifically for the students who are attending this course. I'll upload the assignments today or tomorrow, and I'll give you 1 week's time. These assignments are very simple. It's mostly what I have been talking to you during the class. You can answer there, and you please submit the assignments at neutroncourse@gmail.com for your credit. So this will be the assignments which I'll upload tomorrow, and please try to give me back before the next tutorial, because I'll discuss the assignments during the tutorial session. Thank you.